Hi, my name is Eva, and this is my Assessment 3 Innovative Learning Design Initiative, and it's called Closing the Gap in Design Spaces. And basically the overall summary of it is questioning how to initiate a public exchange of knowledge and networking between academic design spaces, specifically around visual communication and the design industry. So basically, this is the learning problem. Overall, there is a disconnect between academic design spaces, particularly in visual communication and the professional design industry. So overall, I'm trying to figure out why there is a disconnect between theory and practice in terms of visual communication design. And I could go into why forever, but this is just a general sum up, which is explored by Richard Buchanan in Wicked Problems in Design Thinking. And his theory as to why there is a disconnect is because there is an evolving and changing definition of design. Design used to spur from art, and therefore was first considered as an application of aesthetic to passively communicate. But over the years, it has evolved into a problem-solving tool and design thinking tool as methods to communicate, problem solve, and reposition our ideas. However, because of this, there is multiple definitions of what design thinking is, and business spaces and designers have had to build their own terminology in order to figure out what kind of design thinking approaches they'd like to do. So for instance, like in UX and marketing and industrial design, they all have different terminologies in order to define their design processes. But therefore, that's also caused a lack of reflection and communication between business-oriented industries and the academic industries, and has led to a lot of confusion to students when they finish a degree, as they don't really know how to navigate within business-oriented spaces. They aren't really taught much about strategy and design tools, and to work with in these spaces because of the lack of terminology that is built between these spaces. So overall, my program purpose, the aim is to resolve the disconnect between designers within different learning ecosystems, to close the gap between theory and practice in design, and the main objective is to create a learning initiative where designers can be active participants and with building a holistic understanding of the future of design, as well as current and future responsibilities of a designer. This may include networking and LX/UX research to help designers build a larger learning ecosystem, and to document and share all findings through qualitative and quantitative data throughout the event, which is a little spoiler for the learning design scenario. But what really helped me build my learning design approach was the theory of change framework. And this helped me map and create the framework for my design initiative, which included the stakeholders as well as considering the long-term change and outcomes of the program, as well as pinpointing the key assumptions that needed to be backed up with evidence. So overall, the learning outcomes, so the end of the program, the participants were able to this is kind of a bit of a teaser to my solution design approach, which mainly is considered of three things. So the FIA model, which includes the importance of dialogic practices and universal design, learning spaces, introduced by Thornburg in 2004, with the 70-20-10 model with Charles Jennings, and also bringing in design thinking plus research. So these are all my design solution approaches, but overall it's introducing the FIA model to designers and highlighting the importance of qualitative research, as well as exploring methods to help designers communicate and build a network with each other by creating a common place to reflect on shared knowledge and build a universal design language. So overall, these are the stakeholders, and here I brought in the learning outcomes that were inspired and derived from Bloom's taxonomy. So one is the upcoming students as well as current students, helping them define their what they like to pursue, their creative endeavours after completing their degree, as well as educators plus academics and the design professionals. So here I'll start going into the solution design approach. So here I'm kind of investigating, this is the first third of the learning design approach, which is the FIA model. So introduction to FIA model is that FIA brings this theory of using dialogue or skill acquisition through mutual communication. And what's really special about his model is that it creates a sense of universal design because it allows all designers, including the press, which is mainly like the students, to participate and be active, be able to like join the conversation rather than leaving them out of it. So everyone is kind of building this holistic approach to what design can be. And he, in his Pedagogy of the Oppressed book, which is really amazing, he introduces the FIA model in terms of, which is I find really relevant in terms of like planning and organizing things. So basically, his approach to FIA's model is there's three phases. So the first one is the naming phase. So what is the problem? So rather than the stakeholders or whoever finding out the problem, they involve the people who are actually in the problem, which is mainly the students. So it is a sense of like design thinking as well. So what is the problem? And then it goes to the reflection phase. So that's the dialogue stage where it is a mix of informal and formal. But it's like, how do we explain this situation, and then kind of figuring out the action phase. What can be done to change this solution? So this will be introduced into the learning program, which I'll reveal later on. Then the second part of my learning design approach, building my learning design approach, was learning spaces. So learning spaces was introduced by Thornburg in 2004, and he brings in this idea about using visual metaphors to represent learning within different kinds of social spaces. So he's introduced like the campfire, for instance, which is quite like kind of like a hosted talk situation, whereas the water hole is more about kind of more informal, allowing people to converse and have dialogue, kind of have more of a conversation, and the cave is more for reflective purposes. So how can we use Thornburg's idea of learning spaces as a framework to create blended learning experiences? I've also extended this idea of learning spaces through Charles Jennings' 70-20-10 model. So how can we encourage designers to step outside of the learning ecosystem to introduce new perspectives of design into practice? And basically Charles Jennings introduces this idea about, you have 70% or of like learning in your formal ecosystem, whether it's academic space or your job. 20% is the informal things, mentorship and that sort of thing. But that 10%, how do you extend that more to kind of influence and integrate your practice and way of thinking of the industry that you're in? As well, we've got the design thinking plus UX research. And yes, like designers learn this all the time, but it's kind of like, how do you use that in learning design to also, it's almost like conception, to be honest, but creating like an iterative process which you seek to understand your users, challenge assumptions, redefine problems, and create innovative solutions which you can prototype and test. And a way of doing so is kind of throughout building the learning solution is to create personas for each of the stakeholders. And overall design principles that I'm investigating in this learning design initiative mainly is universal design for learning, and how we might do this. UDL is to give equal opportunities for all learners. But one way of doing that is kind of like human-centered design, so that can be advocated through UX LX design and user personas. Another way would be FIA's model, focusing on dialogic practices and learning spaces, which is informal, but allows people to participate any way they'd like, or spectate, or reflect. And then the other way is more blended online in-person learning, so making it really accessible, having hybrid spaces both online and in person through Zoom, and making asynchronous so they can have an online publication afterwards if they can't attend the event as well. So this is my program overview. So this is after all that exploring learning design. This was my outcome and result, which is called Closing the Gap event. So it has 3 different stages. So stage 1 is kind of planning the Closing the Gap event, which uses the FIERS model to organise a public event. The aim is to organise talks and workshops that other designers will find valuable and insightful. Workshop will include design thinking and dialogue conversational practices to build the event. The second stage will include hosting the actual event, which will be hosted by the university, which will have multiple learning spaces, and there will be multiple events at one time that include workshops, talks, networking events, and participants can create their own curated experience by browsing the timetable. And stage 3 is reflecting and closing the gap. So after the event, the designers gather and share qualitative research collected through the co-design workshop and the Closing the Gap event using surveys and reflective feedback. This includes a case study and publication, which will be made for designers to reflect the event. So this is the overall event. The assessments that will be done throughout the initiative is mainly inspired by as a dynamic assessment. So it will be iterative assessments that will happen over time, and there's a mix. So we've got formative assessments, which is kind of happening right after the activities within the events, which will happen as in stage 1, they'll be collected during the co-design workshop, which will be surveys, data, polls, and observations. Again, this process will be iterated in the hosting part of when the actual event happens. So all participants will fill a form before they check in at the event. Participants will also provide feedback after each session they attend. And then stage 3 is reflecting on Closing the Gap event. So a range of designers who participate in the planning and hosting stage provide their feedback and reflection of the learning initiative, which is a summative one, so it's a reflection after all of the event. And then diving into the evaluation, so the evaluation will be very accessible. So it will all be recorded and published online. I feel like the theory of change would be good to evaluate everything as well. And using the New World Kirkpatrick model to kind of evaluate the event if to be conducted again, but also to see if the next time it needs to be evolved and introduce new ways of design thinking to keep up with the design world. I have my evaluation questions there, but it's more about if they actually started building the network in this ecosystem afterwards. So overall, is this innovative? I think it is, because it's addressing wicked problems in design thinking with the FIER model, learning spaces, and design research. By using FIERS model, we allow people who don't usually have a voice in particular environments to participate in conversations that will reposition perspectives around design. This learning initiative advocates for informal learning through dialogue, conversational practices within various learning spaces so that designers can expand their 70-20-10 learning ecosystem. And then overall at the end, there's evaluation, which is create a public kind of evaluated assessment thing. Creating an online publication provides an opportunity for the design community to reflect on the evolving definition of design, which would therefore bridge the gap between theory and practice. And yes, thank you for my talk. And this is my references. Thank you very much. And yes, I hope you enjoyed.